Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about blood spatter, which in the past you may have accidentally said blood splatter, and I want to make sure you don't do that anymore because that's an incorrect terminology. What we should be saying is blood spatter, and it does have you have to enunciate it really well, which obviously I have a hard time doing. So if you look at this, the reason we say that is that a bug would splatter because it does so unpredictably. If I were to squish a bug right now, we wouldn't be able to predict really where the guts and the blood and everything would go. Whereas blood is very predictable as far as what type of injury, is it high velocity? What type of surface is it on? All of these different things, we can actually predict what the pattern would give us. Okay, so that's the biggest difference there. So I want you to understand that when we have a blood droplet, we don't typically classify that as blood spatter because a droplet doesn't provide a pattern for us. Whereas several droplets of blood we can look at and analyze, and that would give us a pattern. So when we think about blood spatter analysis, there's several different type of scenarios you could think of. Most people think of a stabbing, but you can have somebody being hit by a car, somebody being hit in the head with a rock. You could have somebody being shot. So there's lots of different situations where we're going to have some blood spatter occur. Anywhere we have an injury, really, that causes a puncture wound of some sort. So we're able to analyze the blood spatter, and from that we can tell lots of things from that. So we can determine things like, was the person left-handed or right-handed that was doing that was the perpetrator. We could determine what type of injury happened because maybe the body's not there anymore. Maybe somebody fell on the floor and had a head injury and left, but we could tell that they were stabbed in the neck because of the way that the arterial spurt was on the wall. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. We could determine how coagulated the blood is, like if it's chunky or whatever, if it's been a long time since the crime occurred, or if the blood is dried, lots of different things like that. So we're going to look at these in specifics. So here's a picture from a crime scene. It looks like when the person was injured, they might have been laying down and maybe beat. But if you look at the drip pattern, somebody must have been like sitting against the wall. You see that? Because the drip pattern is going like this. So if they were laying down initially, the drip pattern wouldn't have started higher, right? So they must have been at least sitting or kneeling towards like against that wall. All right. So something you might not have thought about, but why does blood actually form droplets? And why doesn't it separate in the air before it hits the ground? So why doesn't it all come apart? Why does it stay in droplets? Okay, it has to do with the forces of adhesion and cohesion in the actual blood itself, right? The viscosity of the blood and the molecules sticking together. Okay, so that's something that we're not going to go into deeply, but I just want you to know that we're able to predict the blood spatter patterns based on what we know about blood in general, just like the substance. So here are some of those specifics. So when something drops, like blood, something with the viscosity of blood, the longer it has to drop, the longer the actual droplet will be when it hits. So that's what that's showing. The closer something is to the surface, which makes sense, it's going to make a more circular drop. And then the teardrop comes from the fact that there's forces of attraction within the molecule that keep it together. Right? So here's another picture of a surface tension. So when you see a blood drop on something that's not porous, like maybe a piece of glass or a windshield, which would be glass, but I was thinking of a mirror originally, it would be a bubble, right? If you look at it from the side view, the actual blood droplet would be a bubble. It wouldn't be flat. Whereas if you looked at the blood drop on a piece of paper or something else that's porous, it's going to soak in and it's not going to have that surface tension. Okay, so if a blood is put in high velocity, right, if there is a high impact spatter or even medium impact spatter, we can overcome the cohesion between the molecules, and that's where we get the different droplets. And we can also get what's called secondary splatter, which is also called satellites. So when a blood droplet hits another droplet, let's say that our my blood spatter expert, let's talk about this. Let's say that somebody's sitting on a gurney, right, as they coming out of the ambulance, and they get set in the hospital in the hallway, and blood's dripping off them. Well, as blood drips off them, it starts to make a puddle. Well, as a one droplet hits the puddle, it creates more spatter, which is called satellites. Okay, so satellite spatter can happen where a piece of a blood droplet is pulled off of another blood droplet. All right, so depending on what type of surface the blood lands on, it'll tell us what type of edge or what type of shape that the actual blood droplet will give us. So if something is like glass or a mirror or something like I was saying before, you're gonna have these really smooth edges, as opposed to something like concrete. You're gonna have these little spiny edges, and so that's what I'm talking about here. It says what surfaces. Sorry, I have things in the way here and it's driving me crazy. I can't even see it. What surfaces would be considered porous? So porous surfaces would be considered like wood, paper, anything where the actual blood can soak in. A couch, seats in a car, stuff like that. So there's different type of blood spatter, obviously. And the first one that we're talking about is a passive. So passive would be like you have a nosebleed, right? And the blood is just dripping out of your nose. Nothing's like forcing it to come out except for gravity. And typically it will have a circular shape like that. If it's 90 degrees, it's just coming straight out of your nose. Okay. Those spiny patterns that would occur here in this picture would be because it hits a surface that's rough, non-porous. Well, it could be porous, but it would be some sort of rough texture, probably. Okay, arterial spurts is specifically if you get hit in any kind of artery, whether it's the one in your neck or your femoral artery in your leg, and you can see here what's happening is it's literally, this is showing just like you would your heart rate, right? As your heart pumps, if you were to look at the thing in the hospital that shows your heart rate, you would see this up and down rhythm. So that's what it's showing you. So that's how you know somebody is badly injured there because it hit some sort of artery. So cast off is one of my favorites. Cast off is showing you that somebody was in some sort of altercation and they had a weapon or their hand, something that they're swinging. And every time they swing it, it creates this cast off pattern. So if you look at this one, how many times do you think that the person swung? Let's say this is an axe and it's covered with blood. How many times do you think they swung this axe? So I'm looking at it and I see here's one swing, here's another swing, and this is probably two swings right here because it looks like double the concentration of blood here. So I'm going to say they swung it about 4 times. So that type of thing can tell you, let's say the person says, oh no, I did this. This could help you corroborate a story or refute something somebody said. It can also show you, sometimes people hide, they try to clean up blood, and this would be a place that would often be on the ceiling, and people don't pay attention to that. And so that could be there to show people, hey, there actually was some sort of injury here, and that's why the blood spatter patterns on the ceiling. You'd be surprised how many people don't think about looking at the ceiling to clean up. Okay, so there's smears, which can be, smears are technically a passive, right? Because it's something that you can, if you have blood on a surface and you actually wipe it across, or you can have blood sitting in like a puddle and then blood on maybe your hand and you wipe through that, right? So those are wipe versus swipe. And the guy that's going to come talk to us, the blood spatter expert, will specifically look at this and talk to us about this. Because if we have a bloody fingerprint and we put it down on a table, would that be a wipe or would it be a swipe? That's type of questions that I might ask you. Here's actually a blood trail, and this can be in several different ways. We can have a blood trail based on somebody that is currently bleeding, right? So they're dripping blood and we see a trail. It could be somebody that was injured, but they have blood like on their shoes, or maybe they're not injured. Maybe they stepped in a puddle of blood and they made a trail for us because it's on their shoes. It could be in the fact where, and I think I'm going to show you a picture of this, or maybe that's actually later, but somebody took a body and put it in a garbage bag, and they dragged the garbage bag to put it by the road, and it drug a trail because blood came out of the bag the whole time. This picture here is actually from the O.J. Simpson case. That's Nicole Simpson at the bottom of the stairs after she was stabbed to death. And you can see that it looks like not just one, but a few different trails there. Somebody walked through and walked back, and there's been a lot of traffic there. Pools of blood are also something we can get, and pools of blood are like arterial in the way that they indicate a very bad injury. This means that the person's lost a lot of blood. It also indicates the person was in that location for a while to drain that blood, right? So those are a couple things we can get from that. Sometimes you get pools of blood in like what's it called? A mattress, and it's what's called a saturation stain because it doesn't just sit there on top, it soaks in, right? So that would be the difference between that. Expirated blood is very specific because if you look at this picture, and it's kind of hard to see this picture, but expirated blood means like if you sneeze or if you cough and you're bleeding and you get blood, it's like if you had tuberculosis, right? And you're bleeding and you cough and you get blood on your tissue or whatever. The blood would be a mixture of saliva and maybe phlegm, right? Snot. And so you're going to get lighter color bubbles. So some of these bubbles on the edge here look pinkish. It's hard to tell in this picture, but that's what I'm talking about here. A typical injury that would cause this would be something like getting punched in the nose, something like that. So you get punched in the nose and you're like breathing hard and you spray it out, or you sneeze. When you have a bloody nose, that would be an example of that. So different spatter patterns are based on the velocity or the amount of impact, right? So this is high velocity. And high velocity we see with a couple things. High velocity is usually associated with either a gunshot wound or a vehicular homicide. It's just somebody getting hit by a car, right? So those are the two that would be the high impact. And we have tiny droplets there, you can see. The medium velocity would be something like a bludgeoning, right? Somebody beating somebody with a bat or hitting somebody with some sort of blunt object is typically that, like rock or whatever. And it usually causes a lot of pooling of blood because you're losing a lot of blood depending on the type, how big the injury is. The low velocity is something like a smaller object hitting you, maybe a hammer, maybe somebody that's weaker using a bat, maybe just somebody getting hit with a stick in the right spot that causes bleeding. So that would just be a low impact there. Low impact could be something like just any type of actual something hitting you, but not really fast to make the small droplets. You can see the difference in the picture here of what versus look at that high impact and how it looks different, high velocity. Okay, so we can talk about the directionality of the actual droplet, and we can talk about the shape. So the longer the shape, the longer the blood spatter looks, like the actual droplets, the farther it traveled. That's one thing you need to look at. It'll be more elongated, right? And what else did I want to tell you here? Yeah, if it's circular, it was 90 degrees, which I've already told you about that, and which would be like something dripping out of your nose. I think that's really all I want to tell you about this one. Okay, so yeah, because this is the directionality. So look at the picture here. The tail of the actual blood droplet indicates the direction the blood droplet's traveling. Okay, so that's what you need to make sure you know. The tail points in the direction of the blood's movement. That's a huge thing here. And here's some calculations if we wanted to calculate the angle of impact. We're not going to actually do that, but if we were to calculate it in the Ed puzzle, the guy does calculate it. And remember, the length and the width that you plug in here will be in millimeters as you measure them. And again, here's more with the calculation of the angle of impact, which is important because it can help you with figuring out where the perpetrator was, especially when there's a argument about, positioning. And here's the calculation. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you calculate these, but this is how you do it for you math people that would be curious. Using some trig here. So this one, I love this picture. It just shows you, like I said, depending on the angle that it falls from. So if it falls directly from your nose and it's straight down a 90-degree angle, we get a perfect circular blood drop. But the more angled it is, the more elongated the blood drop's going to be. We're going to do a lab where we look at some of this. Okay, lines of convergence, and there's Dexter, our famous blood spatter guy. This is, to me, the most painstakingly thing that they do at a crime scene involving blood spatter. They actually, like Dexter showing there, they take yarn and pull it through different points, or maybe they do a laser, depends on, you know, what crime lab's doing it. But what they're doing is they're trying to go through different points in the spatter and connect them back to a certain point, and that certain point will be the point of convergence. Okay. Which can help you determine where the person was. Okay, so point of origin is another thing, and it's right. You're using the point of convergence, so you have to have the point of convergence first, and that's what they're doing in this picture here. They're measuring that. And here's the calculation for the point of origin, which again, you don't need to know how to do, but I just kind of want to show you some of the math behind it. I used to make people do it, that's why it's on here. I used to make people calculate what it was, but I myself am not a huge fan of trig. So, and look, here they have it actually in centimeters. So it depends on, when you're measuring the blood droplets, you should use millimeters, but we're talking about when we're actually doing the distances, I guess they're using centimeters because it's going to be a lot farther. Whatever, you can convert it. So here's an example where they did the point of origin and the lines of convergence at a crime scene. Like I said, very tedious procedure there. And now they do a lot of it with computer programs to show, okay, so we can tell where the victim was, and we should be able to predict where the perpetrator was, right, using these. So that's helpful. Okay, so after this, you have some module questions to do, and I think it's module 7, study questions. So I couldn't resist putting that Dexter picture on there. Maybe if we have time, we'll watch part of Dexter. We'll see. All right, I hope you guys have a great day. So be looking at those module 7 study questions. Let me know if you have any issues. That's it. Thanks. Hello, we're going to do.
There we go.